Auckland's first region-wide homeless count shows an estimated 800 people in the country's biggest city are either sleeping rough or sleeping in cars. Last month, hundreds of volunteers hit the streets in a 3-hour window to get a snapshot of how the most desperate of Auckland's homeless are coping. Earlier this year, the government announced more funding to tackle the housing crisis. Now, the numbers in this study released today don't include people living in temporary accommodation, motor camps and boarding houses. It doesn't include couch surfers or those in uninhabitable and dilapidated homes. Now, Housing First ran the homeless census, and I asked Program Manager Fiona Hamilton how reliable the data is and whether things have improved.
This is, by its very nature, an incredibly complex issue to get an accurate picture around, and we know that for people who are living unsheltered or might be in a car with children, they are not necessarily wanting to be found. So, and there are all sorts of other factors in this. We were careful that volunteers didn't put themselves in unsafe situations, and we know that things like people being moved on just before the count can impact it all. But I guess the key thing to come back to is 336 is the actual number. It went through a really rigorous validation exercise to produce a solid estimate, and we've never had such a well-informed picture of homelessness across the region of Auckland.
Sure, and I guess I wanted to get your point of view on what does this snapshot say, because in May, Phil Twyford announced $100 million to zero in on this. I think about 35 million was looking at providing, 1,500 different emergency places, and then the rest of the money, $60-odd million, was at this was at the Housing First program. Yep. So has that effort worked?
Well, we know that there's definitely movement in the right direction. I think the relatively high numbers of people we see in temporary accommodation, which includes people funded under MSD special needs grants and people in transitional housing, the numbers there show the impact of the government's investment at the beginning of winter. So that's moving people who could potentially have been unsheltered or in cars into temporary accommodation. We also know that over the last 18 months, 362 homeless adults in Auckland have been housed under Housing First. If we add the children into that, that's just under 700. So there definitely has been good investment and good steps in the right direction. However, 800 unsheltered and nearly 3,000 in temporary is still too many. We need people in permanent, stable housing where they can actually flourish. And we know that for a family in a motel or a car, they can't.
I guess that leads us to what's next, because at the time Phil Twyford said, look, no one needs to live in a car this winter. If we've got 157 people before validation, so more than double that. You've got over 300 people, let's say, as a snapshot in Auckland, who are sleeping in cars, presumably through this winter. What needs to be done to get to those people?
Look, some of it is actually, and the government, we have to acknowledge that level of investment they've made, and the numbers have really bumped up over winter. And sometimes it is a matter of actually, as you said, reaching people. There can be a level of mistrust, there can be a level of disengagement, and that's something that that relationship building, that outreach, that bringing people in has to be done over time. I mean, to be honest, over the last few years, we haven't talked about homelessness in the way we have now, and the government has acknowledged there's a problem, and that investment is coming through, and we know there needs to be more, but it is. It's just really important that we keep our eye on people moving into stable housing situations.
And Fiona,
just good outcomes.
Sure. And just finally, that 2013 study back at Otago University, it was able to zero in on particular communities. Of course, it said that Māori and Pacifica, as well as Asian and other migrant communities, are more at risk. Are you able to analyse your figures further to see if the same thing applies here?
We will be doing further analysis, and there will be a report coming out at the end of the year that will have that level of analysis. But just to say, from the Housing First Auckland perspective, we collect data on the people who are in Housing First services, and we know that across Auckland, around 60% of the people under Housing First programs or within Housing First programs are Māori, and around just over 20% are Pacifica.
Fiona Hamilton there from Housing First, saying much has been done to house At least Auckland's homeless and more around the country, but obviously more work to be done, particularly in those more vulnerable communities.